One thing that I thought could be fun is to basically interview GPT and get its take on what it thinks customer lifetime value should be. So the format of this is basically going to be me acting as if I'm an interviewer, and GP is my partner, and let's see how it does. So I'm going to ask it, how would you define customer lifetime value? That's interesting. It's funny that it's treating these as kind of distinct methods. I'm not sure that the cohort method would be mutually exclusive from the traditional method. Now this is a pretty poor definition, if I must say. This also is giving us very little detail. It's kind of strange to call these CLV calculations. So let's narrow it down. It is trying to keep its options open. Let's say, should we base, let me just put it this way. That first definition does not seem to take into account a discount rate. Should CLV incorporate a discount rate or not? I want you to I want you to give me your opinion. Okay, so it does agree that we should include a discount rate. Should the discount rate for a particular company, how do we get it? Yep, it's fair. So it is saying weighted average cost of capital is a good way to do it. Yeah, to me, I think the only potential question is, should it be the weighted average cost of capital or the marginal cost of capital? And depending on the use case, I think one could be more appropriate than the other. Company's internal rate of return. The company's average return on investment over a certain period. Interesting. Needless to say, the spirit should be investors demand of the company a certain rate of return. And so if the company is not able to achieve that return on an investment in the customer, then it's not worth doing. So I'll let it go over here for now, but let's dive into some of the other aspects. Should CLV be based on revenue or profit or something else? That's interesting. Now here's a philosophical point of disagreement that I would have with this. Definition of CLV I don't think should change based on the use case. I think the the measure we may want to focus on should change, but the definition should not change. That being said, I like the fact that they're kind of laying out what I would call the different variants of CLV are, and that you have a revenue-based version of it, and then you have a variable profit-based version of it. Wow, net profit. That would be very onerous. The problem is incorporating the fixed costs. When you're acquiring the next marginal customer, those are already sunk. Wow, and they actually prefer a net profit-based CLV. It's really reasonable. Wouldn't fixed costs be sunk at the time that marginal customer is acquired? So amortizing those costs into CLV appropriate? I love how quickly GPT will change its tune. This is somewhat reasonable, but again, the way that I would account for fixed costs in some sense is through thinking about the volume of customers that are able to be acquired, which is in some sense a very different way of going about incorporating fixed costs. Let's say, what do you think the time horizon is over which we should consider when we define CLV? This is interesting. Again, my general view is there's a difference between the use case and the definition. And kind of by way of analogy, how the measure that we should choose to focus on may differ, but that should not necessarily change the definition of CLV. I think that these are very valid points in that in certain more volatile industries, we may be much more uncertain about, say, a long horizon CLV, but to me, what that would motivate is to focus on a finite horizon CLV as opposed to defining that CLV is some other measure. And the definition of CLV, I think, should not change. So let's just kind of ask that. Is it fair to say that how we choose to define CLV may be conceptually different from whether we may want to focus on a variant of CLV when we are going about calculating it? Could one argue that the definition of a measure should not change the case that we are considering, but rather that we may want to focus on a different measure, different use cases. Value that a customer brings to a business over the entire duration of the relationship. That's funny, it keeps honing in on both the fixed and the variable costs. Well, food for thought. So I'll leave it at here for now. I think in general, what I've come to appreciate more and more about GPT is how quickly it will change its colors depending on your follow-up questions, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. But it also it highlights the need to reprompt often multiple times to get to the right answer. Now let's get into a couple of the real meaty, controversial aspects of the definition of CLV. Okay, so should we include acquisition cost in CLV or not? It really doesn't want to be held to a certain answer. Well, could be. Depends on the use case, and here's the pros and the cons. As we said before, shouldn't the conceptual definition not be a function of the use case? So, what should be the conceptual? Or I should say, if so, should conceptual definition include CAC or not? Yep, bingo. So, needless to say, I would agree with this. That CLV conceptually should include CAC. So conceptually, GPT is saying it should include CAC, it should be indefinite horizon, it should be profit-based. So I guess this is the final, one of the final key distinctions. Now, to follow up on this, the conceptual definition of CLV represent just the profit that we would expect into the future for a given customer, ignoring past profits and expenses? Or should it represent the full totality of a customer's value relative to when that was born, even if that was in the past? Again, this is the key distinction between residual lifetime value and customer lifetime value. This is reasonable. Again, yeah, I would say that this is somewhat reasonable. Yeah, I would say that the definition of CLV should be relative to when the customer was born, but at least it's kind of breaking out different definitions of it. So yeah, it's saying that there's a forward-looking CLV and a historical CLV. Interesting. Might it make more sense to combine what you are calling historical CLV and future CLV? Full expected value of a customer from birth into the future, as opposed to cutting off that valuation present time, or to ignore all prior costs and revenues. Again, I'm kind of steering it in a very particular direction. It's not clear to me that it's saying that this is what CLV should be, but let's ask it. Given what you are saying here, CLV should be equal to, you believe that it would be most appropriate for CLV to be defined as historical CLV, prospective CLV, or combination two, as you are describing in this most recent answer. Well, so it seems it is converging now. I wonder if I didn't push it so hard or play devil's advocate, whether it would have come to this conclusion. But it does seem like we've converged on what I would say CLV should be as being the most appropriate way of defining it. Yeah, so food for thought.